The following presentation occurred during the 2022 South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, First Episode Psychosis, FEP, Conference. This conference occurred from June 1st to June 3rd, 2022 in a hybrid format, with approximately 150 in-person participants in Austin, Texas, and 300 virtual participants from around the world. Conference attendees shared a range of identities and positionalities, including those with lived experience, family members, providers, and researchers. The 2022 theme of innovation and sustainability highlighted not only the radical advancement within early psychosis programs over the past decade, but also the continued transformation that we hope to see of mental health structures and research serving youth and young adults living with psychosis. This conference was an opportunity to engage in shared dialogue across difference, struggle with new ideas, and re-envision a future for mental health structures for youth and young adults living with psychosis. This conference was coordinated and hosted by the South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, in Region 6. An initiative funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to provide free training and ongoing consultation to all professionals that serve individuals with mental health needs. Region 6 includes the states of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, Louisiana, and our tribal communities. The South-Southwest MHTTC is a project of the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health, which is housed at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. By way of a disclaimer, this conference was prepared for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. The opinions expressed throughout the conference are the views of our speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA.
Please give a warm welcome to the Students with Psychosis team.
Hello, my name is Cecilia McGough, and we're going to be introducing the nonprofit Students with Psychosis. So I'll go first with the introduction, then we're going to go down the line here. So again, my name is Cecilia McGough, and I'm the Executive Director for the nonprofit Students with Psychosis. I'm from New York City. My pronouns are they, she.
Hi, I'm Maddie Jiles. I am an exec board member of the nonprofit Students with Psychosis. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm coming from Indianapolis, Indiana.
My name is Katie. I am an advocate with Students with Psychosis. My pronouns are she, her, and I flew in here from a small town outside Chicago.
Hi, y'all. I'm Vera Muñiz-Saurré. I am an exec board member with Students with Psychosis. My pronouns are they, them, and I am coming here from Boston, Massachusetts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ray. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an executive board member of Students with Psychosis, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio.
Good afternoon. My name is Cecilia Joyce. I am an executive board member of Students with Psychosis, and I'm coming in from a town in New Jersey, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hello, my name is Daniel Nepveux. I am an advocate with Students with Psychosis, he, him, and I come from Brenham, Texas.
Thank you so much, everyone, for introducing themselves. We have some powerhouse students and advocates here with us today. We're going to be first talking about how community has affected our lived experiences with psychosis. The first question we have for the panel here is, how has community connecting with fellow peers assisted in your recovery journey?
I'll take that one first if you want me to.
Go for it, Daniel.
Okay, so in the beginning of my first experiences with psychosis, I know that I never felt more alone and more discarded, been placed in some of the psychiatric facilities in my small town in Brenham, Texas. But luckily, I got in contact with different community groups. There were local groups who contacted me. Students with Psychosis went out of their way to reach out to me and bring me into their beautiful family. And I'm here to tell you, community outreach programs, they make a huge difference. I connected with human beings, people who go through the same things that we all go through in different ways, and it made the difference of a lifetime for me. So I would say they helped, they made a big difference, and I think we should all do what we can to support peer groups.
Hello. Can you hear me? Something that was very noticeable for me was when I was first looking for community, it was just really hard to find anything. I looked mostly on the internet, and as we all know, the internet can be a terrible place. But I didn't find any resources, particularly for like anybody with like my own cultural experience or any sort of like community in any sort of large way that allowed me to like meet other people who experience psychosis until like I started finding Students with Psychosis. There were like Discord communities, and having that there was very helpful. Having the community I have with my Discord server, having this community has greatly impacted my treatment journey in a way that is like, it feels very significant, and it helps me like socialize with people who I feel have a lot of shared and similar experiences.
I think for me, it made a big difference as well. When I was first diagnosed, I, just as Daniel said, felt just so alone and discarded. But I was able to find people who were supportive, but it was not the same as finding communities like this group of people where they don't just support me, but they truly understand what I am going through. I have never felt more accepted than the last few days hanging out with you guys.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. All right. I can definitely agree with that. Also, as a person living with schizophrenia, I know when I was a student, I went to Penn State. And when I first opened up about my schizophrenia, I remember trying to find other people with similar experiences. And as much as the mental health initiatives on my campus were doing, a great job talking about health conditions such as depression, anxiety, stress management, and such, I definitely did see like a void when it came to finding fellow peers that just, well, got me and accepted me for someone living with schizophrenia. So community, finding fellow peers was definitely essential in my recovery journey. Now going on to our next question when it comes to the panel. I'm going to ask the panel, how can community building be more accessible? I know definitely during the COVID-19 pandemic, there's definitely been a lot of highlighting when it came to accessibility needs. Before the pandemic, well, isolation is a prevalent topic for people living with psychosis. Funny story, my first doctor broke up with me with an email saying that I wasn't taking my treatment seriously enough because I was having a hard time getting to my appointments because, well, I was struggling with isolation. So that's an example of when it comes to community building, a barrier can be having community members struggling with isolation. But asking our panel, how can we make that community building more accessible to people living with psychosis?
I think that a big part of it for me, for most of my life, I lived in a pretty rural area, and there wasn't any community, and there was very little professional treatment even. Like I would have to travel into the city to get professional treatment, which, at the time, I was in like an unsafe housing environment. So I was like denied treatment a lot of the time by my family. And then also an aspect of that is the lack of treatment for people who are homeless or housing insecure. That's a big thing. And I know a lot of people who are homeless, I've experienced that myself, struggle with mental illness. So it's very crucial that these communities get support.
I think also making an effort to just directly engage with and involve people within the communities that we're trying to support. So like Students with Psychosis does, directly involving in the interventions, on a community level, directly involving the most vulnerable people in our communities in like our services. So like making sure that we are accessible to people who are unhoused, people who are looking for LGBTQ resources, making sure that we have resources to direct people for gender affirming care, and also for community for people of color and making sure that the needs of people of color are being met within our community and finding ways to like elevate their experiences to make sure that they're being conveyed.
Oh, go for it, Katie.
I think also one of the ways that we talk about a lot, but we don't actually do, is talking about it. I know when I was in college, I just desperately wanted to find someone else who had experience with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, psychosis of any kind. And I really couldn't. And in something that I wrote once online, someone commented that there probably were people there who had experienced that and they were just too afraid to come forward. And I guarantee you that they were right, but there wasn't anyone else talking about it but me. And so nobody really felt comfortable.
I absolutely agree that we need to be having this conversation more. And also talking about accessibility, I really want to commend the conference planners for this conference on having a hybrid conference so that we have that both that virtual and in-person programming. At SWP, we also do that as well when it comes to making sure we have that virtual programming. It makes it more accessible. So again, thank you for the conference planners. Well, I like this question. Why and how did you get involved with Students with Psychosis?
Can I take that one?
Go for it, Cece.
Okay, so for me personally, I joined Students with Psychosis for the sense of community. I just moved out to New Jersey from New York City, and I was on the other end of New Jersey, so it wasn't a quick Uber to go visit my friends, and I was severely depressed. I wasn't eating, I wasn't going out, I was staying in bed all day, I wasn't even changing out of my pajamas. And I needed a community. I needed people who understood and could relate to the symptoms that I was feeling, because it felt like people would be like, well, what's going on? What's wrong with you? And you kind of like don't want to tell them like, I'm having a delusional day, like I'm having hallucinations and I don't really want to talk about them with you. So being able to have like a community of people that I can talk to, like, hey, so I was on the bus the other day and I was hallucinating really badly. It really helps to have people who are like, yeah, me too. Like I relate to that. I've been there before. I've even been on the highway hallucinating, on driving myself. And it just makes you feel so much more like better about who you are as a person, to know that there's other people who have similar diagnoses and similar minds to you.
I think my reason for joining Students with Psychosis was, I think oftentimes when it comes to mental health and maintaining in recovery, it's so easy to just get tired. And I think that's the reason why I joined, is because I got tired, which is kind of a weird way to state it, I guess. But it's so easy with psychosis to start to feel invisible among other people. You feel like you can't really talk about it. You can't really be who you are or get what you need. And you just feel like you're slowly fading into the background, suffering and struggling alone, and nobody's there to listen. And when I discovered Students with Psychosis, more so when they discovered me, it suddenly felt like I was being peeled from wallpaper. Like I was no longer just stuck in the drywall.
I would say there were two main reasons I joined. The first one being that I was lucky, very fortunate. They found me and brought me into their group. But another really important reason is I was on the lookout for something different, because I've been trying for 2 years at that point to get help through the VA as a combat veteran, and it's atrocious. It's demeaning and atrocious how they treat the veterans in those places, and a lot more has to be done about that. And SWP made me feel like family, and I'm very, very thankful for that.
We're happy that you're with us, Daniel. Now going into our next question. If you are a person living with psychosis who also falls within an intersecting community, what are some additional perspectives, barriers, or hurdles you have experienced related to that intersection?
I'll take that one, I guess.
Good job.
So one of the biggest intersections with my psychosis is obviously my Blackness. The main thing that I can't really hide about myself. And I think when it comes to how my Blackness and my psychosis intersect, it's so strange, because there's there's this kind of stigma of violence of I present myself mostly as masculine and I am Black. So I'm perceived as Black, I'm perceived as violent most oftentimes. And throughout my life in education, every day when interacting with law enforcement, I have that constant fear of, will I be perceived as violent just because I'm Black? And if I'm able to kind of take that down, if I start to be symptomatic in public, well, that send people into thinking like, oh, they're violent, they're crazy, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's either that or it's the opposite of the spectrum where I'm seen as incapable, or I just don't know what I'm doing because of my Blackness, because I'm psychotic. I'm kind of infantilized because of the identities that I carry through life.
I can totally resonate with that. As someone with mixed Indigenous ancestry, having like my experiences kind of like colored by the lens of colonialism has been an interesting time. I am a conversion therapy survivor, and part of like the aftermath of that was largely me having a lot of trouble accessing resources because I just didn't trust mental health professionals because the only mental health professionals I had were kind of abusive. And so like a lot of that has been colored by my parents' view on gayness, and a lot of that has been through culturally imposed upon white Western colonial values. And that is something that I think is a very common Latin American experience. And I also think that like it's a systemic barrier that there's so disproportionately fewer clinicians of Latin American and Black descent, and that it's hard to find a clinician with your similar cultural background, especially if you're in like an area that is predominantly white clinicians. And so it can be very difficult to find somebody who resonates with your cultural experience and can understand like the cultural nuances of where you come from.
I would also like to speak on this. I relate to like the experiences with abusive professionals and getting healthcare and mental health care. Due to different reasons though, because like I'm trans and I'm also autistic. So these impact how people have treated me, and like, especially with being trans, like as if my dysphoria was a delusion and that like, you know, I wasn't actually trans, and I suffered some mistreatment because of that by professionals. But then also, you know, being adopted and having grown up in poverty, that presented a lot of significant barriers, especially because my family, while we were very poor, in addition to that, they did not accept me being trans. So there was like an abusive environment there. So like the lack of access to professionals like who could relate to my experience, I feel like that's important to some degree. And then just also like gender affirming care has impacted my experience with accessing care for my psychosis as well. So.
Definitely piggybacking off of that, I know as someone who has schizophrenia and also someone part of the LGBTQ plus community, I remember when I first opened up about my psychosis was also around the same time that I opened up about being part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I remember because those two events were very much back to back, my parents very much discredited my opening up about being a pansexual as just part of my mental health condition. And I also know for me personally, I also struggle with some internal stigma as well, or internalized stigma, because when you have a diagnosis that, well, makes you question reality every single day or question the validity of your own thoughts, that definitely complicates that dialogue and thinking about your sexual orientation or your gender identity and such. So I just wanted to add that as well. Now, continuing the conversation about psychosis and intersectionality, what do you all think when it comes to what we can learn from other marginalized communities or historically underrepresented communities when it comes to advocacy?
for it.
There's definitely a reminder that the care is different in an impoverished area because it's harder to gain access to the care. So, you know, the programs are different, the care is different, the accessibility is different, and that needs to be appreciated.
I think something that also comes up is just the normalization of sharing your pronouns. I think that it's much more approachable for LGBTQ people. LGBTQ people experience psychosis, any LGBTQ plus person. Just having the space and having anybody ask you your pronouns or just make that a normalized part of introducing yourself can do wonders for making it very comfortable for your trans and queer participants or whoever's being involved. And also, I think taking notes from like public health in general and like social justice and equity circles and thinking about doing like community-based participatory research from a research perspective and involving people who are within the communities and giving them opportunities to access education and research structures that can allow people to like be more involved within the process of that treatment.
Something that comes to mind for me is like especially from the trans and autistic communities is the idea of things being a spectrum. So like in the autism community, we don't like the labels high functioning and low functioning in general. And I really do not like those being applied to psychosis either. You know, everyone has different symptoms and everyone reacts to those symptoms differently. And these symptoms are impacted by our experience and our past. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
I absolutely love the emphasis of talking about language and just adding on to that point. I think that we could learn a lot from the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to language and accepting what language works for the individual that we're talking to. Just like what Vera was saying about asking someone their pronouns. I would love there to be more of that when it comes to psychosis community on what it being second nature for the person to ask, how do you identify, or what language do you feel comfortable talking about your psychosis, or if they are even comfortable with using the word psychosis. I know when I first was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I, for example, called myself a schizophrenic. And immediately a lot of people started saying, you can't call yourself that. You have to have, it has to be a person living with schizophrenia or living well with schizophrenia, or have so many different words in between that and that the word schizophrenia. And for me, I'm okay with being called schizophrenic. For me, it's kind of empowering to be able to reclaim a word that people say I should be ashamed about. So I think that's just an example of something that we can learn from the LGBTQ plus community that oftentimes reclaims words. When you're talking to someone with schizophrenia, psychosis, or other diagnoses that fall within that within the schizophrenia spectrum or psychosis spectrum, to use language that is, well, empowering to them. And also adding on to when it comes to barriers that might come when having a different intersection and living with psychosis. Adding on to the point that Ray brought up about having autism. I'm someone who is also autistic. And I know for me, having that comorbidity, when I first opened up about my schizophrenia many years ago, I was really timid and shy and kind of worried about also opening up about my autism because I was worried about having, well, another label there. I think that's something and a concern that often comes up when someone has a comorbidity, is worrying about having yet another label placed on them. So going back into our questions for our panel. Have different aspects of your personal experience, identity impacted your ability to access accommodations? So whether at school or in the workplace?
Absolutely. For me, I can be very shy and very timid. So unless the information is presented to me, I am not likely to seek it out because I don't think that I deserve it, or I think that I'm not allowed to ask for it. So in college, I went pretty much my entire first year without accommodations because I didn't feel like I could ask for them. I didn't feel like I was allowed because I felt like maybe I wasn't disabled enough or things like that. But another aspect of my personality is that I can also be very prideful. So there's a portion of me that says, no, I'm going to fight through this. I'm going to push through it. And that's something that personally I have to work on.
For me, it was definitely present that my identities and my psychosis kind of worked against me throughout my entire like educational career. Is that what it's called? A career in education? I work in education now, so I don't know what to call like school. But I was diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia when I was diagnosed when I was in college, but backtracking and working through it, found out that I had had it since childhood, and it had gone undiagnosed, unseen, untreated, unaccommodated for years. And it was just kind of a thing of, I was a child trying to tell teachers, janitors, my parents, like, hey, I'm seeing this thing and I don't think it's supposed to be there. I'm experiencing this thing and I don't think it's supposed to work like that because nobody else is telling me that that's not how it works. And it was just kind of brushed aside of like, oh, just being the class clown, or just a disruptive Black student, or just trying to cause a scene. And I think it carried forward into when I became of age, where I was trying to seek mental health accommodations. And it was kind of seen as a thing of, I was brushed away oftentimes of, oh, well, you walked here yourself, or you found your own way here, so obviously you've got it together. You don't need that much help. And it's just kind of, it stings really to like walk into a place and express that, hey, I need support. And they say, sorry, you're not crazy enough for us. Like, I think the other deterrent was being Black. It's mental health is a very strange conversation to have in a Black household where it's not taken seriously. Often met with the response of, what do you got to be depressed about? Just emotional vulnerability isn't very present there, which is why now I use it explicitly with my students going forward.
I think for me also, as someone who also has ADHD, it can be very difficult for me to do the memory thing and to do the attention thing. So like having appointments, for example, with like disability services, I shouldn't talk so, but like my school doesn't do reminder emails, which is a really weird thing that it is just like a barrier for people who may have like memory issues in terms of like accessing those accommodations. And I feel like it's a very simple fix. And like, I think that that has been something that is not a me thing, is more of a systemic thing. All things are, I guess. And that has definitely affected my ability to access accommodations. And similar to Katie and also Mads, I had trouble accessing accommodations because I didn't think I deserved them, or I didn't think I should take advantage of them. And my family, like growing up in like a Peruvian American household, it also wasn't normalized to talk about mental health. Like you kept it to yourself. And if you did talk about it, it was only with your family and never with anybody in public. So, hey. I definitely, in terms of like my public health approach, because I'm doing a master's in public health, I have been learning that I have to like really fight against those internalized biases, I guess, to like advocate for myself, because like I think that it's unfortunate, but I feel like a lot of the time the best way to get accommodations is that you have to advocate for yourself, because no one else might unless you do it. And like I think for that reason, I think there definitely needs to be a more robust way of like making sure that people have access to these accommodations.
For me, one experience that was very relevant throughout my education from elementary school to high school is that I was pretty severely bullied and even threatened with violence. by my classmates. And so it was really difficult for me to access accommodations when I didn't feel safe in that environment. And I didn't feel like I was taken seriously with my experiences, but not only that, but also my mental health in general. And so like just the lack of like safe environment in school for people who are minorities can really impact the ability to access accommodations.
I would say from my own experience, I grew up kind of in a man's man family. I knew I would be in the infantry since I was a little kid playing with the toy soldiers on the dirt mounds. I just knew it. And it was a tough guy's family. And getting out of the military, you're still expected to be a tough guy, but I carry around a cotton sloth because it makes me feel good. And I'm going to do what makes me feel comfortable, makes me feel safe. And those were some obstacles in the beginning, was accepting that some people are going to judge me. Some people are going to think I'm not a man, whatever that means nowadays, not even certain of that definition. But I came to it and realized I needed to do what was best for me. And if it made me feel safe, if it made me feel grounded, it was a good thing. So yeah, I would say there was some reflections of my childhood that went into my adulthood to make things harder than it should have been. But I got through it.
Thank you everyone for sharing their experiences and adding on to that conversation, going back to like what Katie was saying when it comes to like accessing accommodations from like the Office of Disability Services. I know for me, I had quite a lot of barriers because I struggled with even just the word disability. I struggled with internalized ableism from a younger age. I remember in high school, I had sort of a unique high school experience, as in I went to 2 high schools at the same time. Like in the morning, I took a bus ride 45 minutes to one high school that was a magnet high school. And I freaking love this high school. Get this, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. But the structure was amazing because we had no tests at all. And so it was very much project-based learning. All the classes were integrated where we had an assignment, the math teacher was grading it, the English teacher was grading it, the government teacher was grading it. So it all had a very real world approach. And then Fridays, we weren't even in the classroom. I was out there driving a Jeep through water, checking on some buoys for a research project. So I absolutely loved that school. But with that said, I still ended up going to my other high school the later half of the day for like sports and other classes. And it had that more traditional school atmosphere where you sat in your chairs, you learned towards the test. And what attributed to sort of that unhealthy relationship with the word disabled or disability was because this magnet high school that I went to, which I loved and I very much was excelling in as someone who has a mental health condition and is neurodivergent. But there, another word I don't actually really like is the word gifted. It was called a gifted program. There I was doing well. But then when I was going to the standardized, more traditional classroom atmosphere, they then placed this label on me if I asked for accommodations as disabled. And that made me have like this thinking of it was like a bad thing. So I just wanted to add that into the conversation that sometimes for a student to even access accommodations or ask for those resources, they might have to go through some internal ableism or to even ask for that help. So I just wanted to bring that up. All right, going back into the questions for our panel. So continuing the conversation about accommodations, what are the systemic forces, obstacles that prevent people from getting accommodations?
I think that's one of the more noticeable things for me, and some to the panel as well, that accessing accommodations or even just knowing about accommodations or knowing that I was able to use those accommodations was just something that my school didn't explicitly tell us. And having something during Welcome Week or orientation or something to give information on that would have been very helpful. And just like having some sort of detailed guide or outreach material that is created to inform about disability services and who can seek disability accommodations. Because like, I didn't even know that experiencing any sort of mental health thing qualified me for like accommodations. And because of that, I failed the class and they didn't let me drop that F. I'm just complaining about my school. Yeah, I think that like, I think a lot of that is built on the assumption that like disabled people are just going to find what they need, or they're going to like have someone to find what they need. And I think that's kind of very flawed to like expect the people who need the accommodations that are going to the school and paying like thousands of dollars and not making it clear that they have the resources to succeed in that academic environment.
For me, I think one of the biggest systemic forces that get in the way of seeking medical accommodations are social class. I went to high school and elementary school in the downtown Indianapolis area, which if you've been in Indianapolis, don't. It's not the wealthiest place. And then I went to college in a rural Indianapolis, in the Indiana area, which is an experience, to say the least. But one of the things that I noticed going from a very kind of booming, not compared to Austin, not booming, but a city, kind of metropolitan area, to a very rural area where the nearest hospital is a 45-minute or more drive away on a good day. It makes seeking out help, seeking out any kind of mental health, anything, virtually impossible or impractical. On top of the actual cost of it, it feels, being down there, it felt just morally corrupt to place the burden of someone's health and responsibility over that on them and solely on them, when it should be on the community and transforming, like, how can we help them? Like, how can you get help to them? I had to drive 2 hours to get to a psychiatrist so I could have a prescription, so I could drive 2 hours back so that I could walk 20 minutes to a CVS to get the pills to go back to campus. And honestly, some days I was just like, you know what, I'm just, oh well, I got a final tomorrow. Like, it's impossible to juggle all that and expect to be healthy at the same time.
I think with my school, I went to a sort of mid-sized Ivy League equivalent university that had tons and tons of money, but the money was not put towards either funding programs for disability support or advertising them at all. The disability office, which I didn't honestly even know existed until a professor told me, was about 3 people for this whole school. And so they did their best and they were amazing. But if they had had more help, I just can't imagine, you know, the more things they would have been able to do for people. And then when it comes to advertising these things as well, we had programs during Welcome Week that, you know, covered all sorts of topics, sexual assault, things like that, but there wasn't anything about mental health. And so I was a part of a mental health group on campus, and we did a campaign that secured a grant for funding for this program, where one of our main goals was just to have the information put out there about all of the services on campus, because there were so many people who didn't know. And I just think it's ridiculous that students had to fight for this, something that, you know, obviously psychosis may not be as common as other mental illnesses or as a part of other mental illnesses, but nonetheless, nothing was being put out there at all. And it's such an epidemic right now of all of this mental illness and everything.
There's some that I can think of, like discrimination, housing access, and transportation. But I specifically want to talk about the stigma in healthcare a bit, because as you know, at least most places, you do need a formal diagnosis. And at my college, if you don't have a record of your IEP, or if you had no IEP, or if there was too long since you had your IEP, you actually had to get your doctor to like describe your symptoms and like fill out formal paperwork. So like a simple diagnostic assessment was not enough. So like when people with psychosis, and especially those who have intersectional identities or multiple disabilities, when they're accessing healthcare, especially like an emergency setting, there's still very much mistreatment that goes on. And we talk about trauma-informed care a lot, but things like forced restraint, forced medication, et cetera, are still very real, especially for people who have psychosis. So like the barriers to feeling safe to get a formal diagnosis, but then also like the follow-up care there that you may need to get that paperwork so you can access your accommodations. It's a very difficult process, and it doesn't always feel safe or accessible for people with disabilities.
I kind of want to piggyback up on that a little bit, but I guess in an abstract manner, how information is presented to us matters. Like, let's say you're me and you're in a crisis situation and you're in the hospital, and they're basically blackmailing you. Either you call your family or we will force commit you. How am I supposed to react to that? I know I need help. I know I do. But now I'm going to escape your hospital, which I've done 3 times. 3 times. It's important how it's related to us. Talk to us like we are in charge of our bodies and our future. Treat us with the same respect you would anyone else. You'll get a better response.
I absolutely agree there. And when it comes to like crisis response and also talking about crisis response on campuses, I remember for me, I opened up about my schizophrenia when I was in college. And something that I would really like to see implemented more in colleges is education about mental health, particularly also schizophrenia, psychosis, to RAs, residential assistants, because I remember back in college when I was struggling with my schizophrenia. One night I went to the ER, I stayed there overnight, and my doctor said that it was okay for me to return back to my dorm room. But however, when I returned back to my dorm room, I was not only greeted by my 3 roommates, but also the RA and a can't help person. Because my RA had heard the word schizophrenia and things sort of escalated there. And they heard that I had gone to the hospital. So things escalated, even though I have no past history of violence. Actually, someone with schizophrenia is more likely to be an abuse victim rather than an abuser. For example, part of high school, I lived in a homeless abuse shelter. So what happened next was, well, really inexcusable. They brought police officers in full uniform into my dorm room. They patted me down in front of my roommates. I had to convince them not to put handcuffs on me. And then they escorted me into a marked police car that was parked right outside our dining commons. So friends were seeing me put into a police car. And then I was gone for around like 10 days. But when I came back, well, the cat was out of the bag. People knew something was up. And even though I'm not ashamed or I'm not upset that I'm so open about my schizophrenia like I am today, but something that infuriates me is that I didn't get the choice of when, if, and how I wanted to open up about my schizophrenia. So that's another thing I wanted to add to the conversation is the importance of the privacy of our students. It's and something going back to our conversation about intersectionality, something we can learn from the LGBTQ+ community is if someone opens up about their gender identity or sexuality, that's their story to tell, that's their information to share. The same type of privacy should also be talked about if someone wants to open up about their psychosis.
I just wanted to add on to that real quick. I know that in the area that I lived for many years, that there was no like in-person emergency psychiatric support. There was no one like you could call and they would come except for the police. And, I remember one time my parents had called the police on me when I attempted suicide. And one of the police officers told me that I didn't try hard enough to kill myself. So like, it's not a great system. We really need more like emergency support that they can come and pick you up, take you to the hospital, or you can go in and get like immediate help. That's definitely a big barrier.
Absolutely agree there. There's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to crisis response, both on campus and off campus. And then bringing the conversation back to barriers when it comes to accommodations. Another one that comes to mind is just sometimes the amount of time it takes to get your accommodations approved. I remember being a student, I would have to make an appointment at the Office of Disabilities to have to get an in-person appointment to get my letter approved so that I can get accommodations in class. And oftentimes, actually almost every single semester, I didn't get that appointment until after classes had already started. So if you have accommodations to help you with your schoolwork, but you can't access them until the class has already started and you've already have assignments due and such, you're already behind. And that's going to add that additional barriers. So that's something I wanted to bring up. All right, going back to the questions for the panel. So on a more positive note, what is the most helpful experience you've personally had with accessing accommodations?
So my best experience has actually started out a pretty bad experience. I remember returning student, I went back to school and I was in math class taking my first math test in almost 10 years. And I studied and I went to the tutoring center and I was like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do a great job. And they put the test down and I just start crying because I can't, like none of this even, I don't even remember learning any of this, like what happened. So I like just started like tears rolling down my eyes and my professor's like, listen, what's going on? And I'm like, listen, I have like some mental health problems and I've been studying and I'm new to school again. And I haven't been in the loop in so long. I don't have a guidance counselor who helped me sign up for these classes. So they brought me after class and sat me down and they explained to me that they have an accommodation center, that there's ability to take the tests outside of class, that there's the ability to take the test with extended time. And as a result, I passed the class with a B-, but I still passed the class.
I think one helpful experience that I had wasn't really with accessing formal accommodations through the school, but I had a professor who really went out of her way and it really meant a lot to me. I was taking German and it was my freshman year and I was still getting used to my medications, my antipsychotics, because I had only been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder for about a year. And one of my medications made me extremely drowsy and I had not figured out how to handle that. I hadn't figured out that I could ask for a different medication. And unfortunately, the only time of day that I could take this course was at 9 or 10 a.m. And so within the first 2 weeks, I got an email from the professor saying, hey, I noticed, you're falling asleep in class a lot. What's going on? Is there anything I can do? And so I explained, the situation, my medication, the fact that I was still working it out, and the fact that this was the only time I could take this course. And what she did for me was that on test days, I would take my test in the afternoon while she was on her lunch break between classes. So I would skip the morning class when everyone else took their exam. I would sleep in, I would get rested. I would be able to be ready and fully awake and prepared to take these exams. And it just made a huge difference for me.
For me, I think the most helpful experiences I've had are when I've needed like extensions on assignments because of an emergency. Not only do I have mental illness, but I'm also chronically ill. So those two together can like cause a lot of emergencies to pop up. And some professors have been really helpful in like being understanding of that and, extending my time on assignments. And there's this one professor in the honors program at Columbus State who particularly has a really accessible classroom because like he has built-in extensions and then also like the option to like have a discussion and turn in notes instead of writing an essay, which may be more accessible to some students. So like things like that can be really helpful.
My most helpful accommodation was having a personal advocate. Coming from a household that was poor to homeless to poor to homeless, I went to a small, predominantly white liberal arts college in rural Indiana. So I didn't really know what was going on most of the time. And so when I was entering like different medical institutions and they're asking me all these questions at a rapid fire and I'm not answering fast enough and they're moving on to the next one to try to figure out what's wrong with me and why I couldn't answer that question. And I'm just sitting here like, I still trying to work through all the voices to hear what you said the first time. And you're on question 18. And so having a personal advocate to like, hey, remind the doctor, like, hey, slow down. Like, let them answer, like let them think first, because oftentimes like doctors and nurses will just kind of, they're trying to find like a cure, a way to help you because you're sick or you're ailed or something. And also when I first went to the inpatient facility, which was 6 hours away from where my college was, the ambulance showed up with a squad car. Who knows why? We know why. And they show up and the ambulance, the EMT is like, okay, what is wrong with them? And my advocate's like, oh, well, they have schizophrenia. They're like, okay, so 8 straps. I'm like 8 straps of what? And so the officer is standing next to her and is like, oh, do you want me to put them in handcuffs too? And she's just like, why would we need to do that? And so just to have someone there, because obviously my opinion wasn't going to matter to anyone there because I was just incapable of understanding the situation. I was what they would consider incoherent. Had they put handcuffs on me, I probably would have been reasonably irate in my opinion. But just having someone there to kind of be on my side and be seen as kind of a barrier between me and everyone else really helps.
That's it. No, you can go ahead, buddy.
I think the most helpful experience I had was with one of my undergrad professors. She was really great. I took like 3 of her classes. Shout out to Amanda. And she was really great. I remember this was right before I had gotten accommodations, before I realized I could get them. And I went to her office, and then we were talking about what classes I was going to take next semester or whatever. And then I was just like, yeah, I think I have schizophrenia. And then I just burst into tears. And it's funny now. But she did such a good job of just being like, it's okay. There are resources available. Just having somebody tell me that because leading up to this moment, I was just like, oh, this is a death sentence. But it's not. It's right now, I think I'm the happiest I've ever been, quite honestly. And having a professor that was just able to talk to me and tell me that I could use the accommodations in her class, that I could take any extensions that I wanted, and that every deadline was a soft deadline, which was nice. And just having the ability to also being able to stand up in the back of class and walk back and forth, that is very helpful. I need to move, and having somebody that understand that was something that was beneficial to me in that learning environment was just very helpful.
I think it's an accommodation. Surprisingly, it involves the police force doing something right, and it was hospitalization, and I had ripped out my IVs and stormed outside, and of course cops came in 5 different cars to circle me. It was escalating really quickly, but then this female officer came down and just extended her hand without saying a word, and I later learned she was the mental health specialist with the police force to deal with crisis scenarios. And that is an accommodation that is new, at least for me in a rural area. Usually it's just the regular police, but it made a huge difference. She got me to go inside. I didn't have to get tackled to the ground that time or anything. It was much more pleasant to walk back inside.
Thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and adding some more onto talking about some accommodations. I think another accommodation, this goes back to actually something Katie was talking about earlier, about how sometimes when a student is finding the treatment plan that works for them, because oftentimes when you're first diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychosis, there's that overlap of also being a younger adult or in college and such. And I think that needs to be talked about more. That also needs to be highlighted because sometimes your accommodations might need to change because you might be changing different treatment options. For example, I was on a treatment option that very much affected my sleep schedule. And oftentimes I felt like I would have to choose, do I be a good patient today and take my medication and follow my treatment plan? But if I take this medication, I'm going to fall asleep and not be able to do my homework. Or do I be a good student and stay up and study for this exam? That should never have to be a choice or thinking you have to choose between being a patient or being a student. So that's why we need to also have that conversation around accommodations, that it might change from semester to semester or even within the semester because it's not stagnant. Also, let me just add, when you have a treatment option that makes it difficult to sleep, and I was studying astronomy astrophysics at Penn State, let me just say, telescope time was difficult, you all. Just wanted to put that out there. But going back to more questions for our panel. So how do you think accommodations can transfer over to a student employee experience, work study, or research? So we're talking a lot about academic accommodations. We were also talking about some crisis response as well, but how can we have these accommodations in the workplace?
I think I personally have accommodations at my workplace. I work in education now, full circle. And I am openly schizophrenic at my workplace. Had to check a box on an application for it. So, and the way that my coworkers have learned to live with it, because it's interesting. It's just kind of a thing of constantly checking in whenever you notice something is off. And it's gone so far that it's no longer a thing that everyone just does with me, but just a thing that we do as a team together, of stepping into someone's class when you're walking past saying like, hey, do you need anything? Do you need a break for something? And it's traveled so far now that even our kids do it, where like they will actively say like, hey, I need a break. And it's like, okay, it's like, all right, I'm not gonna question it. And so like they'll go to a different room, they'll gather themselves back, they'll come back 5 to 10 minutes later, and they're back into the system again. So it's just kind of that, just having that emotional vulnerability in that space to openly say like, hey, like I need this help here. And I think that's just one of the most impactful accommodations I've seen in the workplace so far.
So I am a student employee, and also being a social work student, I have practicums. And I think the most helpful accommodation for me in these situations has been flexibility with the schedule, because like I mentioned earlier, with mental health and then chronic illness, you just have really bad days sometimes and you just can't do anything. So I really have appreciated the flexibility that I've been able to get as a student employee, and that's been really important to my experience.
I got really lucky when I was a student. The job that I had was working as research assistant for some professors at the medical school who were studying schizophrenia. And so they had obviously a very deep understanding of what I was going through. So I had a very flexible schedule. They were very understanding when I had some very severe symptoms and couldn't come in, and they were very discreet about it, even with the other professors who were also studying schizophrenia. And I really appreciated that. And so the accommodations that I had in college transferred over only to a few different jobs that I've had. I was working in finance for a couple of years, and I had extended time on the licensing exams and things like that, but it is something that I kept very, very quiet because finance isn't really schizophrenia friendly. But in my current job at a law firm, we had to get a little more creative because things like having a note taker, having extended time on tests, that doesn't really work out there. So what we sort of figured out is that I get 2 extra breaks a day to get my thoughts together when I get disorganized, calm down if I have a panic attack, things like that. Everyone else also knows that though I don't have someone who's like a formal note taker for me, they know that because of my medication, my fine motor skills are not as great as they used to be. So they will pause. The attorneys tend to come rattle off everything that they need. And they know now to stop and pause and let me write it down slowly, or send me an email with the instructions, or write it down in advance and give it to me. And they've just been really good about being very flexible with it and being very creative.
I think added on to that conversation when it comes to being more accommodating in workplaces is also creating an atmosphere, an environment where a person, even though they shouldn't have to feel like that they have to disclose about their diagnosis, but still is an environment where it's welcoming if they do choose to disclose about their diagnosis, that it would be well received. I know for me, when I was a college student, I also had a part-time job downtown, and I would have a difficult time because again, I would have issues with my sleep schedule about getting to my shifts on time. And there are only so many times you can tell your manager, I overslept my alarm, food poisoning again. So they ended up catching on a bit that I was, that something was going on and I was struggling there. And this was at a point in my journey where I was trying to open up a little bit more about my diagnosis. So I decided to open up about my diagnosis to my manager. And her response was, I know about schizophrenia. I've watched Criminal Minds. And I'm like, I mean, you don't know about schizophrenia. Funny story though, that's how I first heard the word schizophrenia was through watching the TV show Criminal Minds. And let me say, not a great way to first learn about the word schizophrenia. And unfortunately, even though the manager like tried to have like a conversation with me and whatnot, it just was not the same working there after that conversation. I realized that they weren't giving me the same types of responsibilities. I felt like they were treating me very much like with kids' gloves and such, like I was a ticking time bomb ready to go off. So I ended up not working there and ended up leaving that position. So that's something that also needs to happen when we talk about workplaces, environments, is having a space where, again, no one feels sort of forced to disclose about their diagnosis, because you don't owe your story to anyone. But at that same time, creating that environment that if someone does choose to be vulnerable and open up about their diagnosis, that they get that it being well received. My question, going back to the panel, when it comes to accommodations, whether in the workplace or in academia, what's an accommodation do you all think is underutilized?
So in my undergrad, I did not know that this technology existed, but if y'all know about the LiveScribe pen, like it's a pen that you can like write with and it records the lecture. And if you tap on your writing, it replays the part of the lecture that you were on when you were writing that thing. So it's very helpful, but it's also expensive and not accessible. So I was really thankful that my school gave it to me, but also they only give me one notebook and you need a special notebook for it. So like that was very helpful. And I think that it's definitely underutilized, and mostly because of probably budget concerns, but like there was some of your budget to that, please.
Yeah, my school wasn't really into funding disability as much. I had an old-fashioned note taker, which was great, except there was actually one professor who would not allow computers and would not give me the slides, and no one wanted to handwrite their notes and then give it to the disability office and then give it to me. So I didn't get notes for that class. But in general, having a note taker was amazing.
I would say for me, the accommodation that gets underutilized that I see the most is the accommodation where you can get extended time on assignments. I feel like a lot of people are like, wait, what? You can what? Wait, what? Like it just,
nobody knows about it. And it's just like, it's underspoken about. And I feel like going back a little bit to the previous question, I feel like the best way to help accommodate a new employee or a new student is letting them know these accommodations exist.
I absolutely agree there. And I think that when it comes to like opposite disability services on campuses, they should also have a list of accommodations when it comes to what's been helpful for students living with psychosis. Because I know when I went to my office talking about accommodations, they didn't have, like, I didn't know, one, what was available, but then two, they didn't have like what's worked in the past for other students with psychosis. So having something there, like a database or examples, and also feedback from the lived experience perspective from fellow students, I think would have been very helpful. Also, another accommodation that I found very beneficial was when I would take tests, I would take tests in like a separate room in a cubicle all by myself. They'd also give me mints. I didn't ask for mints, but I appreciated the mints. What they did to also help me out there was I would struggle with looking too far ahead in my test, and I would struggle with scattered thoughts and hallucinating and such during my test. So my accommodation was getting my test not only just one page at a time, one question at a time, so that it helped me pace through my test better, so that I wasn't looking ahead or starting to skip around to different questions. And I found that very, very helpful, because it also allowed it that if, say, I start having an episode during the test, I could then pause that test, and it would mean that I wouldn't have looked ahead or anything like that. Or so it gave that allowance there to stop the test in case I started having an episode. So that's something else that I feel is not very utilized. All right, going into our next question. We've sort of touched on this already, but adding on to this conversation, how can professors, employers best support community members who experience psychosis?
I mean, just to reiterate on what I said earlier, I feel like you letting me know that the accommodations exist, like what is available to me at this new workplace. Because whenever I sign up for a new job, they ask me if I have a disability, but they don't ask me if they'd like to accommodate my disability. I feel like they should go together. And yeah, a survey, some type of like feedback database where they ask you like, how do you like these accommodations, so that they can help like navigate. Do I go a little bit more left or a little bit more right with them? Would be really helpful, especially in a work environment.
I would say treat us like the adults we are, while also showing some understanding and compassion and patience towards our needs. Don't get us as a sympathy hire, and don't tell random strangers how good of a person you are for hiring this weirdo and consider yourself morally victorious. We are adults, we are people, and the workplaces can show us the same respect while also showing patience and understanding toward our needs.
I think one thing would be to, in order for them to better be able to welcome us, is to teach everyone, teach employees, teach staff members, professors, administrative people, all of it, and need to know, because even with just the counseling center at my school, my parents, meaning well, disclosed my diagnosis to them when I arrived my freshman year, and they treated me like I was a bomb about to go off. And these are people who are trained to comfort and work with people who are going through mental health struggles. And so to have these people who should have been the ones who understood, who should have been the ones who were supportive, treat me in that way was really difficult. But then it continued throughout the administration, some professors, not all. The students actually were probably the most supportive. And in workplaces, it was very similar. People just act weird around you when you come out like that. And it's something that was actually, when I was in college, about midway through, I was all about, just, I'm gonna, tell everyone that I have schizoaffective disorder. I'm gonna change everything. And it was a great idea. But when I went and I applied to a lab, to work with someone who was studying bipolar disorder and psychosis and things like that that go with it, I readily disclosed my diagnosis. And he said, that's something that you're probably going to want to keep close to your chest when you come into interviews and things. And at the time I was horribly offended, but after college, as time has gone on, as I've worked in retail, finance, things like that, I realized how true that was. And it really shouldn't be that way, but it's because nobody was educated on what schizophrenia really is like, what psychosis really entails. So it was extremely awkward for me, that carried over even into my current job, where a subset of what we do is work with people who have children or adult children who have special needs, including mental illness, very commonly psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things like that. Even amongst them, because I had this whole experience throughout the rest of my time in college and with employers, I didn't feel safe opening up about it. And they gave me little hints that it would be okay if I came out with something, because they could tell that something was wrong. But it was so baked in. And even then, they admit that they don't know, they admit that they don't understand, and they're willing to learn, and that is fantastic. But this is something that needs to extend beyond places that work with people with special needs, beyond, anything. Everyone really needs to learn more about this. But if you're going to look in colleges, you have to go beyond the counseling center, you have to go beyond staff and professors, administrators. Everyone needs to learn about this.
I cannot agree more that there definitely needs to be more education about psychosis, schizophrenia on college campuses, the administration, and workplaces, and in the community. Adding on to that conversation, something that, like I talked about earlier, how residential assistants, RAs, should have more mental health training there, or a little bit knowing a little bit more of awareness. The same could be said when it comes to your academic advisors. I know for me, my academic advisor who helped me put together my class schedule, my first one I had there, had no clue about really how to accommodate someone living with schizophrenia, because perhaps they just didn't have the opportunity to get that training through the university. But if you have someone that is helping you put together your schedule, they should also have a background in mental health training. I know for me, my second academic advisor was just extremely amazing. She was very helpful when I opened up about my schizophrenia, and also advocated for me when the university has this rule, and this is not just something that is exclusive to Penn State, but we've seen this with other students as well at other universities, is oftentimes if a student is needing to take a mental health leave from a university. For me, I've had 6 psych ward stays, and all of that through when I was going to the university. So some of those semesters, it just would not work out if I was trying to balance a course load and going in and out of the hospital, trying to find the right treatment plan that worked for me. So what my academic advisor helped for advocating for me was that I could stay in the dorm room, because at Penn State and at a lot of other universities, if you have to take a mental leave, and if you're not currently enrolled in your classes, they kick you out, or you have to leave your housing, which is just ridiculous to me, because here you're having someone struggling with their mental health, and then you're going to throw on top of that housing insecurity, because we can't make that assumption that everyone has a supportive home life situation to go back to. I know I didn't. And so I'm very grateful that my academic advisor advocated for me there, and I was able to stay in the dorm rooms. So that's something else I wanted to add. I see that we're getting closer and closer to time before, well, we're at time. We are at time, you all. So I guess we are now opening up for Q&A. Thanks, Maddie.
All right. Hi, I'm Greer. I work for Dunconia in Wisconsin. therapy within the first episode psychosis program. And a lot of the kiddos I work with are just kind of starting to have those initial kind of the onset where they're just kind of starting to hear things and see things. And the work we do is so unique, and there's no, I always say, like, there's no guidebook, guys. Like, just trying to understand your experience and really just be here with you in this moment and share this space and trying to understand. And there's so many things in life as a, you know, 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader, 9th grader that throw all these other factors into stress, and then trying to navigate through hearing voices. And I just appreciate so much of the feedback you said about education for people around them to really understand their experience is very, I look at it as very unique and different. It's unique to what the education is there around other disabilities that maybe are more, I don't know, is it noticeable with the eye. I mean, I always say, like, your brain is an organ just like anything else, you know, and really normalize it. But my question is really around any insight or input that you guys can think of that could be helpful for, you know, kids in junior high school experiencing this, like, that is such a gap that, like, I'm passionate about helping spread, you know, knowledge, awareness, like what's helpful during those years amidst so many other things that are going on. Like, can you guys think of anything from your stories that might be applicable that we can then bring to our kids that we're serving?
So I love DBT. Marshall Linehan, Marshall, we love the DBT manual. But the skills in that are actually very good. I don't think that it necessarily needs to be directly from that book, but like similar skills, like mindfulness skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills, emotion regulation, distress tolerance. I think those are all very generalizable. There's actually a book that came out this year by Maggie Mullen, I think, the DBT for Psychosis workbook. And I want to look at, I haven't gotten it yet. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll kiki about it. Yeah, I think that just mindfulness skills just go a long way, just like having the tools to cope when you're in crisis.
You know what, for me is like the most valuable thing when I'm in crisis is when I'm talking to someone who's neurotypical and they don't say to me, you know, your delusion's not real, right? Like, there's no reason to explain that to me, because as far as I'm concerned, I have the emotions, I have the thoughts, I have everything about what you're telling me is not real is real to me. And I feel like that needs to be the most like understood thing about dealing with someone with psychosis is there's no reason to explain to me that I'm not, that it's a delusion. There's just no reason to explain to me. Just let's talk about it. Let's get through it. You can ask me if I can follow my treatment plan, but don't tell me it's not real.
I think one thing that really helped me was having some sense of like normalcy, sort of. So I was very lucky in that I was given the decision when I was diagnosed whether or not I wanted to go to a hospital. And I said no, which honestly now looking back was the wrong choice, but we moved on. But even if I had been given an option of, you know, maybe not choosing the hospital, but choosing what I brought with me to the hospital, having some sort of kind of semblance of normal life, and that you are still a part of this. You are not just a patient, you are still a person, you are still a kid, you are still, you know, a child or anything like that, just not losing touch with that sort of regular everyday sort of life.
What I would have really appreciated when I was in like elementary school through high school is like more programming, like clubs, organizations, events, things like that, because I know that I felt very isolated and alone. And that was a big part of my education. I had to switch schools twice because of that. And so I would have really appreciated that. And that extends to like mental health programs as well, like just expanding your services, and, you know, things like recreational therapy can be really great. And there's not enough of that offered like in inpatient and things like that. So definitely more programs.
I would bounce off of Cece here a little bit, and would say the person who's trying to help, the response they give to the person in crisis, it matters a lot. Like in her saying, don't tell me it's not real, because I mean, we can smell these things, feel them, hear them, touch them. It's real to us. But sometimes just being present and logical instead of trying to tell me it's not real will work better. I was in a post-ICU psychosis where I was trying to convince the doctors that my mermaid wife was with me. I need to take her back to the ocean, obviously. And all he said was, Daniel, visiting time is passed, so she has to go. Instead of arguing with me that she wasn't real. And that worked. For me at the time, that worked.
Do you have time for more questions?
Yes, I would love to have another question. And I would actually love to check in with our virtual audience because we have a number of people who are virtual today. Jessie, are there any questions from our virtual audience that you might share?
Yes, we have one from someone named Jennifer asking, are there SWP chapters in West Virginia? And how can I connect clients with the chapter? What are the eligibility requirements and age range? And also a thank you.
That's such a great question. So you can be a part of SWP, and we're open to students and advocates worldwide. So that also includes students and advocates living in West Virginia when it comes to our virtual programming. For requirements there, you do have to be over the age of 18. And shout out to West Virginia. That's where I've done a lot of my research when I did radio astronomy at the Green Bank Research Center. So I love you, West Virginia.
Awesome. Well, that was a short one. So I'm going to squeeze in another because your knowledge is very valuable. Arnold, are there any cards in the audience or are we? Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know who was first. I'm sorry. Is that okay? All right. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shauna Eberhardt. I'm a clinical director in North Dakota for a human service center. We are just starting our first episode psychosis program there. And so we work historically with a large group of individuals. There's not enough service for everybody, I think, as anyone here can probably attest to. But one of the things I was thinking of as I was sitting back there is, so I'm hearing a lot about getting your group involved with some of the services and things like that. But interestingly enough, as a clinician in grad school, this would have been absolutely invaluable information. We're taught about symptomology in counselor education. We're taught about interventions, but not through lived experience. So I guess my question is, have there been any incentives or approaches to get individuals such as your chapter being involved in more counselor education programs?
Yes, absolutely. So with SWP, we have quite a few different membership options. So right now we have been very much focused on the lived experience perspective. So for our student and advocate memberships, those are from the lived experience perspective. But we have expanded to other memberships as well, where we have a membership for mental health care professionals. You can be a faculty member and get a membership to bring SWP to your school. Family or friends membership as well, and also a creative membership, because people with schizophrenia and psychosis, going back to talking about criminal minds, we aren't very well represented in media. So we have those different membership options that are available to people even outside of the lived experience perspective. Because when you're trying to help a community, it's important that we have allies as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was an extremely powerful panel, and to each one of you contributed something unique. Can we just have, this was, it's brave and it's vulnerable, right? To share your own stories in this format. So can we just have a big round of applause for the work that was done?
Thank you for joining us for the recording of this presentation from the 2022 South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, First Episode Psychosis, FEP Conference. To learn more about this conference or the work of the South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, please see our website, accessible by the QR code on screen. You may also join our newsletter or follow us on Twitter or Facebook with the QR codes on screen now.